So we're doing good. Might be nice to see some art-directed fractures though, or at least nothing too crazy. But I would say in general, the first thing that comes to mind is like this cockpit area, right? You know, these little strips of metal with glass between them, those would probably rip. And even looking down the side here, again, we have all these like weak point holes. I don't really know if that's really where the metal would rip, but again, that's the point of art direction. It might be cool to just have it kind of yawn open a little bit. Let's come back into our fracture town area here. And we need to go all the way up before this cluster storage thing, because any fractures we make, we want those to basically be new pieces of geometry, much in the way that this is a chunk, or this is a piece, and this is a piece. Any art-directed fractures that we do, I want those to be new individual pieces that can pull apart from each other. So I don't want to store those cluster things until after we fractured. So let's make a sub-network. Because this is all like, I don't know how many fractures you want to do, but I'm going to say art-directed fractures, just for the sake of not, having this area out here get too messy. All that kind of stuff we can do in here instead. I'm going to put a null. I like to have a null inside here at the top, because you can't visualize the incoming geometry by clicking on that, but now I can by having this here. So just say input. So I'm not going to do anything too complicated. I'm going to make a grid. Where's my grid? There it is. I'm going to make a grid. I'm going to say, we'll do it in 2 phases. I'll make a very low res grid here. If I hide the outside for a second, or I guess it's not really the outside. If I look at this, it is showing me the outside. I wonder if I'm getting that lingering. There we go. Anyway, I've got a grid, and I want to be able to just move a couple, just these control points here, and then I'll subdivide it afterwards so that I can get a nice smooth taper. Let me show you what I mean. So here's my grid. Here's my helicopter. I'm going to say, first of all, I want this to be a lot bigger, so I'm going to make it like that, and then I can move it. I could move it like, I'll make like a transform here, and I'll say, I want to move it this way to kind of center it. Let's make that 3. And again, it's these, maybe I'll actually do it the opposite way here. It's these windows that I want my grid to kind of pass through. So if I subdivide here, I could subdivide it a bunch of times. I could do like, let's make a whole bunch of geometry that we can put a mountain on, like so. Maybe, oh, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to keep looking at this. So I want this stuff to pass through up here. So I'm going to go back up to my grid. That's what I was saying earlier, where I just have a few points. So I'm going to say, take these points here, move them up. Maybe something like, here we go. So now I have a nice smooth, so even though this was, just a very simple thing here, when I subdivided it, it becomes this nice thing here. Whatever you want to do to make a piece of cutting geometry, it doesn't really matter. The point is that we now have that. Now I don't want to necessarily cut the entire helicopter with this one piece of geometry. So fortunately, the Boolean fracture itself can take this in, take that in, and I can say, just work on certain things. So as usual, if I click this, if I have this set, let's go into selection mode, primitive mode, and then let's go back to changing, somehow I flew out of my, that's funny. Anyway, as selection mode 4 for primitives, let's go back to selecting things by name, was the point. So here, if I click on this, I just want to fracture this thing and this thing. Press enter. Now you'll see I have a fracture line through here, not through here, and then again through here and here, and not through the doors and everything else. So there you go. I want to append, and then the piece prefix will be like this. So again, now when I look at this, you'll see it had the original name of the shape up there, and now it has an underscore piece, and that can go, that's pretty much it. That can go right out. If you want to refracture, like if you want to do a second fracture, let's say on one of these new pieces that you made, it can be a good idea to turn off detriangulate all polygons. If you do that, it looks like this, because it triangulates them before it actually does the fracture. Typically, keep this on all polygons, because it just looks nicer, and it will deform nicer later on. But if you are going to subfracture it, and you get an error, if you subfracture it and you don't get an error, then just keep it like this. But if we wanted to do a second Boolean fracture on, let's say, just this top piece, it might have a problem, and so put no polygons. Just so you know. So there you go. So that worked. I'm just going to duplicate all this stuff, and then on this one, I'll say this grid can go in along the helicopter way, if you will. And so I'll do another Boolean fracture. So, and this one we'll use this new one that we just made. And this time I'm going to say, let us just do, nope, gotta bring this back again. So let me just actually hook this up to the right thing. Here we go. So I'll point it to just this thing on the top. There you go. You can see we got our fracture through there. And you know, you can always do an exploded view if you want to see what we're getting. You can see how we have this jagged metal cut here and a jagged metal cut here. This is something else that you wouldn't necessarily get if you had it just, you know, do fractures on its own. We get to have full control over what the fracture looks like, exactly where it is, and so on and so forth. But so the point is, they have new names, which is important because those names then feed into everything else that we talked about. They now become the clusters. Now you'll see, well, now we'll actually have to refracture it. So let me do that real quick. Change this to 2, save the disk, and then once it's done, we'll reload it. All right, so that's it. Click reload. Always remember to click reload. And so everything will, you know, it'll just trickle down through the rest of the constraints, and it'll, you know, even like the stitching down here will now be stitching those new things together. Let's just prove that to ourselves real quick by viewing it if you still have this thing here. So yep, sure enough, we can see it's there. I mean, it should be. And yeah, let's just see what it looks like. Maybe it'll look cool, hopefully. All right, so it's working. You know, why not? The stuff, you can see the crack down here along the tail. We can see the bottom is moving independently of the top. Kind of hard. That one's a little bit harder to see, but it's definitely working. You can see how it's moving as a separate mass from the top. So cool. So yeah, art directable fractures. Actually, this was pretty successful. I like how the crack starts traveling here, and then it's not broken by the time it's up here. So we have this kind of tear along the top. Pretty cool. I mean, you could do lots of art directable fractures all over the thing, and to get that kind of cool stuff. Awesome. So that worked. So now let's move on to finally to rigging up other parts of the helicopter.